And our second of 4 polling questions asks, what do you think of when you hear the term digital transformation? And again, we ask that you select all choices that apply from top to bottom. The choices are Internet of Things, process automation. You may have also heard of it as robotic process automation, for example, artificial intelligence, which can encompass its subset, machine learning, data analytics, or other. And again, we do ask that you select at least one of the check boxes and then click on the submit button so that we can record your response. As with our first of 4 polling questions, we do want to make sure that attendees have sufficient time to respond, so we will give attendees some time to respond. We'll then briefly reveal and summarize how you have responded. And just as our first polling question to some extent informed our discussion, so too will your responses to our second of 4 polling questions. Again, we want attendees to indicate what you think of when you hear the term digital transformation. Again, we ask that you select all choices, at least one, and then we ask that you click on the submit button. And what we can see from among respondents, and by the way, as you may know, responses to questions with checkboxes will exceed 100% because you can select more than one response. With that said, I would acknowledge that 4 out of 5 respondents have indicated process automation, that's very interesting, a not too distant second, data analytics, and then third, artificial intelligence. So really the leading choices in order, process automation, data analytics, artificial intelligence. So with that in mind, what I'd like to do now is pose our second discussion question. I want to pose this now starting with Nate, then Chris, then Gareth, and then Scott. And that is, how can finance executives partner with IT and operations teams, including supply chain teams, to leverage advances in automation, process automation, for example, and artificial intelligence to accelerate contract compliance? Love to hear your thoughts, again, starting with Nate, then Chris, then Gareth, and then Scott.
Thanks, Joe. I think that poll question was a great segue into this question you posed. So I'll start off by saying it's been referenced in the past that today's CFOs and finance leaders are responsible for much more than finance. On average, 5 functions other than finance now report to the CFO. This can include many areas, including M&A transactions, risk management, of course, technology, and procurement. For newer activities and trends such as digitalization, few of those CFOs say their companies are prepared to be competitive. We have CFOs saying that their companies do not yet have capabilities for agile decision-making and decentralized decision-making they will need to become competitive for the years coming. If new technology and trends are adding to the evolution of the CFO's role, they also have the potential to make it easier for the financial leaders to understand current business complexities. One of those areas I noted we work extensively with is the coordination between the Chief Procurement Officer and the CFO. It has also been noted that on average, Fortune 1000 corporations have over 40,000 active contracts across various levels of their organization. Each step requires extensive manual review effort by the key stakeholders, including legal, procurement, finance, in addition to collaboration with the supply base. In case of large-scale or long-term contracts, even members of the executive teams we see often are involved. A buyer-vendor relationship typically begins with the need recognition and purchase requisition from the business teams. Manually reviewing years' worth of vendor agreements, iterations, and comparing it to organizational requirements takes up a lot of the legal and procurement team's time in these large companies. The CFO and CPO can actually take contractual data housed in fragmented IT systems throughout their business to provide unprecedented insights that can be leveraged to curb spend demand and negotiate the most favorable terms. Finance and procurement can work together to allow for better informed corporate policies and strategic procurement cost reduction savings. AI-driven analysis helps identify clauses that can prevent leakages and leverages concessions and enforces compliance. So by proactively teaming up the CFO and the CPO, it is an integral part to building a world-class supply chain management program focused on effectively managing the drivers behind this cost and making a significant impact on the P&L statement. So some of the questions we address is how organizations can reduce gaps in current procurement processes. How can businesses optimize procurement efficiency, enhance visibility, and improve regulatory compliance? Well, having a robust AI-powered contract management solution we see oftentimes is an answer. So with that said, I'd like to hand it over to some of our other panelists maybe to discuss this further.
Thank you very much, Nate. Chris, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Clearly that the need for communication among finance, IT, operations, supply chain is essential. And when we look at contract compliance, that's something that affects all these areas. So to what extent is it possible not only to leverage technological advances, but also use these advances to help foster collaboration and communication among all the areas that are essentially responsible for contract compliance?
Yeah, a great question, Nate, and great response. And I think totally right. An integrated world is the better world and the place to be. But, I'm going to go out on a limb and actually say, the finance function is going through a transformation, much like every other function in the bank, inclusive of IT and your IT partners. When I look at some of our partners, our clients that I've worked with over the years, IT was treated like a commodity, and they tried to use it as a labor arbitrage play, and there was a lot of outsourcing. And that disconnected the function from the underlying technology. As we go through and go forward, and data is such a critical element, I think that's the ultimate connector between everybody in the organization is data. So being able to see your data progress through the organization and change and standardize that is going to allow you to integrate more efficiently and effectively with your risk functions, with your legal functions, with your operations teams, finance teams, etc. But you need to really understand and trust the IT function, and the IT function needs to trust the CFO and the finance leaders around the decisioning on what's going to enable them more effectively. That's a big challenge in most organizations. So how you start there, I think what IT needs to understand from you is your pinch points. Where are you struggling? Where do you have excess overhead? Where do you have to fill in the gaps with data because the data is not well managed, or it's not curated, or it's not delivered in a manner that suits your needs for your organization? And really, we saw, I think in with Basel, they had risk data aggregation and reporting. They've got all sorts of rules coming up that are talking about how you manage your data throughout the organization, but also the creation of a CDO, so a Chief Data Officer. So I think what's most important is knowing, and how you're going to get that collaboration is knowing the function and communicating the function, the pain points you have today, but also understanding from your technology team where you are at as an organization and your overall maturity. Do I need to make some changes there to really start adapting the more modern technologies that exist? Because putting something in isn't the end result. You obviously have process and change implications that would go hand in hand with any big system change. So I think awareness of that is key, and communication is key. So that's kind of our position, but maybe Gareth, you can add into that, or somebody else, or Scott. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Sounds good.
Thank you very much,
So,
Chris and Nate. Gareth, love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just then taking or expanding on Chris's point on the importance of that data flow and systems and connecting them up. I think then the other piece to a finance can look to IT or work with IT is then saying, well, once we've got the data connected up, how can we better understand it with newer technologies? And how in doing that can we develop our understanding, or how can AI develop its understanding? Let me give an example of that, right? If I think of my own experience in my career way back at Ford Motor Company, as somebody in finance, you're encouraged to rotate every 2 years into another role. So it could be, finance and marketing, sales, or product development, or manufacturing, or even come right out of finance and do a role in core marketing, and then come back into finance. And of course, the reason for that was that, the feeling was the better you understood those different roles, the more effective you could be. Well, so logically, if you use technology in the same way, that would be great. In the past, you couldn't, right? So when I'm helping clients in the past implement, governance, risk, and compliance technology, I'd be doing that in isolation from somebody working on an HR system or an IT system. But I think now the largest and most advanced IT functions and the largest organizations are thinking more about how can we acquire capabilities that can be applied across a business. So how can I apply a capability that helps understand language? So, and obviously I'm referring now to think about language and contracts, but if I have that capability ready, how might I then reapply that to understanding language in the front line or from a more commercial point of view, not just from a contractual risk point of view? How might I apply it in the HR space, and so on and so on. So the more you do that, the more effective that technology becomes, because it will increasingly understand context. And so when we think about that, I think it's not just about thinking, okay, here's a bot, if you will, here's this technology that does that. It's as much about the vendor behind that technology and their ability to work across multiple use cases with one organization so they can better leverage that technology. So I think for that reason, finance, when they're working with IT, it's then saying, well, okay, who else would benefit from the same capabilities that we're looking at? They might have a different use case, but the need is the same. It is how to better understand context in non-standardized data.
Thank you very much, Gareth and Chris and Nate. Scott, love to hear your thoughts, especially given the responses to the poll, where 80% or slightly more than 80% indicated process automation, 69% indicating data analytics, and 62% indicating artificial intelligence when asked about what they think of when they think of digital transformation in the context of this question. Scott, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. That's, again, consistent with what we're seeing and hearing, I guess, out there in the market across different customers and different industries and things. So I'm going to just challenge the question that's put up there, because it's actually, there's a bit of a broader message or theme, I guess, that's coming out of this. And I'll apologize to Chris. Coming last is actually great, because you guys make some wonderful points that I'm making all these notes on. So I changed my mind. I like coming fourth here. But fundamentally, it's not, as the question is posed there, it's not just about contract compliance, right? It's about that broader, transparent access to the data that's hidden across all forms of content, including your contracts. So you've heard, Nate, Chris, and Gareth all talk about the multiple lines of business spanning different areas of the organization. So in terms of answering the question, how can finance executives partner with IT and operations? What we've seen, and there'll be a couple of warnings in here too, what we've seen work really well is this idea of a center of excellence. So it combines a couple of things. First of all, Chris is absolutely right. IT is no longer, filling orders for laptops and network systems. They're actually seen as a strategic partners and should be at the table. So an interesting question is, some recent research I was reading was actually asking the question, quite often CIOs report up into finance. So it might be an interesting little self-test that in your company, if you guys on the guys and ladies on the call are in finance, does IT report up into you, or is it a whole separate thing, is seen as its own strategic unit? That might be an indication of just how your organization views this sort of transition to a digital business, essentially. So we have seen this success around the idea of a center of excellence, and it's this combination of information technology and the lines of business proactively and cross-functionally working on selecting technologies that can be applied to solve not only one problem, but ideally multiple problems. So you heard Chris talk a little bit about that, acquiring a technology that can be applied across different lines of business. Sorry, it was Gareth that was mentioning that. And we see that work quite well. Now, the caution I'll throw out there is that IT people hate to hear the word center of excellence because unfortunately there's a center of automation, there's a center of excellence for automation, center of excellence for AI, center of excellence for X, Y, Z. So you really have to be careful about how it's actually deployed and that it's not just rolled out ad nauseum. But developing that cross-functional business and IT relationship can actually work really well. And looking at opportunities to find low-hanging fruit where you can actually get an early win, demonstrate some clear value, and then expand beyond that is something that we've seen work fairly well. So again, it's making sure that those groups are talking together, and it starts with that C-level support. You know, the company has to support this transition, but then finance can actually participate in those cross-functional discussions that bring sort of business and IT together. And then focus on getting some of those early wins and then expanding beyond that to other areas of the business. So, yeah, that was my thoughts on that.